The night air in Chicago carried a strange tension, cold, heavy, as if the whole city were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Rachel Moore couldn't quite explain why, but there was something about that evening that unsettled her. Her 8-year-old daughter, Lily, seemed to sense it too. It was supposed to be a simple night out, a rare chance for the two of them to enjoy something beyond the grind of long shifts and unpaid bills. Rachel's best friend was working the closing shift at L'Oro di Milano, one of the most exclusive Italian restaurants in downtown, and had promised to sneak them a leftover slice of tiramisu. For a single mother who spent her days waitressing in a greasy spoon on the West Side, Rachel had never even dreamed of stepping into a place like this. Yet here they were. Lily, dressed in her nicest little cardigan, stood neatly beside the hostess stand, her wide eyes shimmering beneath the golden chandelier light. Unlike most children her age, she didn't fidget or wander. She simply watched, and then she stopped watching. She started listening. Her small face tensed, her gaze sharpened, and she tugged gently at her mother's sleeve, leaning in close to whisper, words that made Rachel's entire body turn to ice. "Mom," she breathed. "The men at the bar, they're speaking Russian. They said they put something in that man's pasta. It's going to stop his heart before he finishes dessert." Rachel spun around, pulse pounding. At the center of the grand dining room, among the deep red velvet chairs and the crystal lights glinting against the white marble floor, sat a man in a dark tailored suit. His posture was perfectly straight, his eyes cold and unnervingly still, as if the whole room instinctively knew he was someone you didn't cross. His presence needed no introduction. It could only be felt. He wasn't an ordinary guest. He carried the quiet command of a man accustomed to power, to danger, to walking the fine edge between life and death. And Lily, her little girl of 8, was standing in the middle of it all, perceiving what no one else seemed to notice. Rachel's gaze shifted toward the bar, where 2 men in suits were murmuring in a language she couldn't understand. Something icy crept up her spine. Not ordinary fear, but the deep, instinctive knowing that nothing would ever be the same after tonight. She tightened her grip on Lily's hand, fighting to stay calm. Every instinct in her told her they needed to leave. But then there was the man, the one only a few steps away, about to eat the pasta that might end his life. She didn't know his name, but the look in his eyes, and the silent presence of his bodyguards nearby, told her enough. And if Lily was right, he had only a few minutes left to live. Rachel tightened her grip on her daughter's hand, trying to steady the wild beat in her chest while her eyes stayed fixed on the man seated at the center table of the restaurant. Dominic Rinaldi. That name was never printed in the papers. But among the serving staff, especially in fine dining rooms, it carried a weight all its own. A name people did not speak aloud but artfully avoided, as if stepping around a coming storm. Dominic sat there unaware, oblivious to the 2 men behind him who were arranging his death. Rachel could not hear their words, but Lily could, and the child's understanding was not casual or fanciful. It was precise and terrifying. When Rachel bent down and met her daughter's eyes, she saw a seriousness so cold it cut through her like a blade. There was no childish playfulness, no misreading, no imagination at work. Lily did not look at her mother, but kept her gaze fixed on the 2 men at the bar. And in a small voice that held unshakable certainty, she said, "They said it is a special drug from Moscow. It will not leave traces in the blood. It stops the heart within a few minutes and looks like a stroke." Rachel felt as if she had slid into an invisible pit where reason no longer helped. She had never been near anything dangerous. Her life was a loop of server uniforms, late bills, and a single wish to keep Lily safe. Yet now that safety was threatened by something beyond her control, by the strange ability of her daughter. Rachel had first noticed that gift 3 years ago. When Lily was only 5 years old, once in a supermarket, they had stood near an elderly woman speaking French to her grandson. Rachel heard nothing but Lily burst out laughing and then retell the whole conversation exactly as if she had understood every word. From that moment, if Lily heard even a few sentences in a language, she would understand and speak it back naturally. Rachel had never told anyone, not even her closest friend, because she herself could not make sense of it. Was it a gift? A curse. How could a child carry such a thing without trembling with fear? But there was no time for pondering now. She looked again toward the bar. The two men still murmured. Glancing at the center table where Dominic lifted a wineglass and studied the menu with easy composure. A server emerged from the kitchen carrying a steaming plate of pasta, the faint scent of truffle trailing in the air. This was the dish Lily had warned about. Rachel felt the blood chill in her veins. She should have yanked her daughter and fled. She had no money. No power. Nothing but a mother's instinct. And that instinct was shouting that she could not stand by. Not when someone was about to die. And not when her small girl trembled because she knew something nobody else did. Lily tilted her head up to meet her mother's eyes for the first time in minutes and said, "Mom, we have to tell him." The words rang in Rachel's head like an alarm. Not for their content, but for the resolve in the voice. There was nothing childlike in that command. Only duty, and a deep fear that if they did not speak out, someone would die. Rachel opened her mouth to stop her. But it was too late. Lily slipped from her hand and threaded between crowded tables toward Dominic's table. Her skirt swaying with each determined step. Rachel felt as if she were suffocating. Her heart ready to leap from her ribs. She followed her daughter on autopilot, indifferent to the stares of everyone in the room. The whole thing unfolded in less than 10 seconds. But to Rachel, time stretched out as if the moment encompassed an entire lifetime. A life she now knew would never be the same again from this instant onward. Lily reached the table before Rachel could even touch the hem of her daughter's sleeve. The little girl extended a trembling hand and brushed against the cuff of the powerful man seated there. Dominic Rinaldi's head lifted instantly, his gaze sharp as a blade sweeping down over the child standing beside him. For a heartbeat, time stopped. No one in the restaurant spoke. The clink of cutlery, the laughter, the soft pour of wine, all sounds seemed to vanish into the silence stretching between the three figures at the center of the room. The two bodyguards behind Dominic reacted at once. One stepped back half a pace, hand hovering near his waistband, while the other narrowed his eyes toward Rachel, who was hurrying toward them. Dominic neither pulled away nor spoke. He simply looked at the girl. His eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and caution. Lily did not retreat. Her voice rose, small yet unwavering, every word deliberate, each one chosen with care. "Don't eat the pasta. The men at the bar, they poisoned it. They said your heart will stop before you finish dessert." Rachel arrived just in time to hear the last words. Her knees nearly gave out. Her gaze met Dominic's in a silent, electric instant. Before she could stammer an apology, Dominic gave the slightest nod. One of his men stepped forward, stopping the waiter who was approaching with a steaming plate of pasta, the scent of black truffle drifting gently through the air. Every eye in the restaurant turned toward them. Dominic still said nothing. With a subtle glance, he tilted his head toward the left-hand guard and murmured something low. The guard hesitated only a fraction of a second, then nodded, took the plate from the waiter, set it on the table, drew a silver fork, and speared a small bite. Rachel wanted to scream. Every nerve in her body cried out against what was about to happen. But she couldn't move. Lily clutched her mother's hand, her eyes wide, brimming with fear. The guard chewed slowly, swallowed, and stood upright for a few seconds, as if nothing were wrong. Then suddenly he collapsed, clutching his throat, his face flushing crimson. The fork clattered onto the marble floor with a sharp metallic ring. Chows erupted. A scream tore through the air. Chair scraped. Glass shattered. Panic rippled through the room like a wave. Dominic, however, did not move. His gaze had frozen on the bar, where the two men were now scrambling to their feet. Faces twisted with shock and terror. They knew the plan had failed, and they knew they had only seconds left to escape. Rachel held Lily tight as Dominic rose, his movement precise and commanding, his voice cut through the noise, low and absolute, the kind of voice that silenced everything around it. "You and the girl come with me. Now." Rachel couldn't form a word. She moved as if in a dream, swept along by the current of his authority. Another guard appeared, flanking them, steering them through the kitchen where the chef stood frozen. wide-eyed at what they had just heard. Dominic followed close behind, issuing orders into his phone, his voice tight and controlled with barely contained fury. A black SUV idled in the alley behind the restaurant, engine running. Dominic opened the rear door and almost pushed Rachel and Lily inside before climbing in after them. The door slammed shut just as the car sped away. Rachel wrapped her arms around Lily, feeling the child's ragged breathing, her own heart pounding so hard it hurt. Dominic turned to look at them, his eyes assessing, calculating, his voice rough and low. I filled the silence of the moving car. How did she know? None of them were speaking English. Rachel hadn't yet found her words when Lily lifted her head and said softly but firmly, "I understand every language. I only need to hear a few sentences." Dominic said nothing. He stared at the girl, as though looking at a variable he hadn't known existed, something that defied all logic. And in that gaze, Rachel understood from this moment on. They were no longer just two accidental witnesses in a restaurant. They were evidence, a burden, or perhaps an opportunity. But one thing was certain: they would not be allowed to walk away easily. The black SUV slid through downtown Chicago intersections, streetlights streaking past like smears of light in Rachel's eyes. She held Lily tight, not knowing where they were going. Only that the man whose life her daughter had just saved was now seated less than an arm's length from them, carrying with him an undercurrent of danger she had never imagined would pull her into its orbit. Dominic Rinaldi sat back comfortably, yet his eyes never left the two of them. In his hand, the phone had gone silent after his fourth short, decisive call since they had climbed into the car. Each call brisk and unflinching. Rachel had never seen anyone command a situation with such calm, especially after having so nearly died at a table only minutes before. He rested one hand on his knee, while his other smoothed a worn gold ring, and after a silence long enough that Rachel could not help but look up, he spoke. "What is your name?" Rachel hesitated, then answered softly. "Rachel Moore. This is my daughter, Lily." Dominic nodded, his gaze lingering on the child's unruffled face. "Does she often hear things like that?" Rachel glanced down at Lily, who had quieted but still clung to her mother's hand. "Not often," Rachel replied, "but that ability has been there since Lily was 5. She can understand everything. Everything." Dominic said nothing, merely nodded again. But the look in his eyes had shifted from suspicion to calculation. He was arranging facts in his head, weighing risk against reward, and measuring the invisible debt that had just formed because of the child before him. The SUV veered into an underground tunnel that led to the basement of a Gold Coast skyscraper, and the door opened automatically. When the car stopped, 2 men in black suits were already waiting. One of them opened the door on Rachel's side but kept his eyes on Dominic for a signal. Dominic only inclined his head. Rachel and Lily were escorted down a private corridor and into an elevator that rose to the top floor, where warm golden light filled a lavish penthouse that was as beautiful as it was icy. Modern furnishings, pale hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling glass offered a panoramic view of Chicago at night. The city stretched below them like a living, overwhelming painting that felt both breathtaking and alien. Rachel lingered near the entrance, hesitant to step further in. Dominic moved to the small bar, poured himself a glass of amber liquor, and kept watching them. "I should be thanking you," he said, lifting the glass but not drinking. "If your child had not warned me, I would have died at that table. You understand that, don't you?" Rachel swallowed hard. She did understand, and the knowledge made her shake. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. We went for free dessert. My friend works there." Dominic nodded without judgment. "And now your friend will be investigated. The restaurant will be temporarily closed. One of my most loyal guards is in the ER with organ failure, and 2 Russian killers are being hunted through the night." Rachel did not know how to respond. All she could do was look at her daughter, the little girl who had unwittingly set all this in motion with a few words. Lily showed no fear and no confusion. She merely regarded Dominic with a quiet gaze, as if sensing the invisible weight of the world he bore on his shoulders. Dominic poured another drink. "I do not like owing anyone," he said, and I certainly do not like having my life saved by an 8-year-old I do not even know. Rachel murmured. We do not want your gratitude. We just want to leave. Forget this ever happened. Dominic set the glass down and stepped closer, neither threatening nor gentle. Do you honestly think you can forget? Rachel, those 2 assassins have seen you and the child. You are the only people in Chicago who heard their plan. Do you think they will let you slip quietly out of the game as if you had never existed? The air seemed to thicken. Dominic stared at her without blinking. So, for the time being, you and the girl will stay here, safe, under my protection, until I know who is behind this. And until I can guarantee that no one will come for you in the night. Rachel opened her mouth to protest. But the words died, not from fear of Dominic, but because he was right. And because for the first time she understood that whether she wanted to or not, they had entered a world where the rules were not those of ordinary people. And Dominic Rinaldi, the man who had just narrowly escaped death because of a plate of pasta, was the only person who could keep them alive. Rachel sat motionless on the ash-gray leather chair, still unaccustomed to the softness and warmth of the expensive furnishings surrounding her. Lily had fallen asleep on the long sofa by the window, wrapped in a cream-colored cashmere blanket that one of Dominic's staff had brought in. The penthouse was steeped in a luxurious quiet, the only sound, the faint rush of wind beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass where Chicago glowed below alive. Glittering, a living map of fate that Rachel had never imagined she would enter. Dominic stood near the balcony, still in his dark suit, broad-shouldered and composed. He had no guards with him here. Perhaps he believed anyone who reached this floor was no longer a stranger, or perhaps he was simply a man who feared no one. Rachel still couldn't quite understand him. His name, Dominic Rinaldi, was one she had overheard whispered among the regulars at the diner where she worked, always accompanied by lowered voices, quick glances, and an abrupt, reverent silence. He was someone everyone knew to stay away from, though no one dared explain why. And now Rachel, the woman who lived by the rule, the less involved, the better, was sitting in his private penthouse, holding the daughter who had saved his life only hours ago. Dominic turned, his eyes drifting briefly to the sleeping child before resting on Rachel. There was no threat in that gaze, but no relief either, only the look of a man studying an unexpected chessboard that had appeared in front of him, one he had never wanted to play. You need to understand something, he said, his voice deep and deliberate. You and your daughter are no longer outsiders, whether you want it or not. You witnessed a failed assassination attempt on me. That puts you at the center of a war you didn't choose, but one you can't walk away from. Rachel clasped her hands tightly in her lap. She knew he was right, and that truth pressed the air from her lungs. We don't want anything to do with your world, she said softly, eyes downcast. I just want to protect my daughter. Dominic didn't smile, but his tone softened slightly. So do I. I don't allow children to get pulled into adult affairs, especially not that child. But here's the reality. The people who tried to kill me will now want you and Lily dead too. Not out of hatred, out of necessity. They'll want to seal the leak. Rachel drew in a sharp breath, feeling her familiar world dissolve layer by layer. The everyday worries about rent and bills suddenly felt like luxuries of another life. Now only one thing mattered: keeping Lily alive. Dominic moved closer to the coffee table, poured a glass of water, and handed it to her. Not whiskey, not wine, just water, clear and simple. The gesture caught her off guard, and for a fleeting moment she saw something in him that didn't match the shadowed rumors whispered about his name. I had your apartment checked, Dominic continued. We found signs of a break-in tonight. Rachel's eyes widened. What the back window was forced open. Footprints on the balcony. The ground floor camera disabled. Maybe they were planning something. Maybe they just wanted to confirm you were still alive. Either way, you can't go back there. Rachel had nothing left to argue. Every door she'd once thought could lead them out had quietly closed. Dominic sat across from her, his eyes no longer cold but careful, as if he were betting on an unexpected card in his hand. I'll arrange temporary housing for you and Lily, secure, guarded, with cameras and everything you'll need. You won't lack for anything. But in return, I need complete cooperation. No unnecessary calls. No leaving the safe house without clearance. And absolutely no one can know where you are." Rachel nodded almost automatically. She had no other choice. Yet somewhere deep inside, a part of her stayed alert. This man's life had been saved by her daughter, but he was also someone who could make them disappear without a trace. Dominic rose, adjusting his cufflinks with the ease of long habit. "Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow." He turned and walked into an inner room, closing the door behind him, leaving Rachel in the heavy, breathless quiet. Outside the glass, Chicago still shimmered, brilliant, indifferent, magnificent. But for Rachel, the world had changed forever, and she no longer knew if she would ever find her way back to the life she'd once had. If such a thing was still possible, Rachel woke the next morning with the disorienting feeling that she was borrowing someone else's dream. She wasn't used to the scent of polished wood in the air, the filtered sunlight slipping through heavy drapes, or the absolute quiet of a place untouched by sirens, or the hum of a diner's grease hood. The living room felt so vast that she seemed smaller inside it, as though she had wandered into the private world of someone powerful and unreachable. Lily was still asleep, curled up beneath a thick blanket on the sofa, her face more peaceful than it had ever been in their worn-down West Side apartment. Rachel moved quietly into the kitchen, a sleek, modern space of glossy black induction stove, automatic espresso machine, and handleless cabinets that gleamed like a showroom. Everything was so precise, so immaculate. It made her feel out of place. Dominic was already there, sleeves rolled up, slicing onions with practiced ease, as if he'd done it his whole life. Rachel froze, unsure of what to say. Dominic didn't look at her right away. He set the knife down, turned to the stove, and said in an even tone, "I cook every morning. Old habit. My mother taught me." Rachel stepped closer, brushing her fingertips over the cool edge of the counter. "I wouldn't have guessed you were the type to cook." He poured olive oil into a pan. The flame rose softly. "A steady gold. Everyone has a side no one else sees," he said. "And I don't trust food made by strangers when I can make it myself." Rachel said nothing, only watched him. He didn't look like the sort of man she'd imagined, no cinematic image of a crime lord in a penthouse. In the calm light of morning, Dominic Rinaldi looked like a solitary man who had lived too long under control, for whom cooking was the only act left that didn't require suspicion. He cracked the eggs and flipped them one by one with effortless precision. Not a drop of oil spilling. "Did she sleep well?" he asked. Rachel nodded. "Better than she ever does." Dominic nodded too, as if that confirmed something he already knew. He set 2 plates of eggs and toast on a small table by the window, poured 2 glasses of orange juice, and sat down. No guards, no servants, just Dominic, a man of frightening influence, handing Rachel a plate with his own hands. She sat cautiously but didn't refuse. "I had my men check the entire city last night." Dominic began after a few seconds of quiet. "Cameras around the restaurant. Escape routes. License plates leaving the area. We got their faces, and I know the name of one of them." Rachel lowered her fork. Suddenly the food tasted heavier, harder to swallow. Dominic looked at her, his eyes sharp but not cold. "I'm telling you this because you're part of this now, not because I need anything from you. But if you're here, you should understand what you're up against." Rachel nodded, fingers tightening on her napkin. "They'll come back, won't they?" Dominic leaned back, his gaze drifting to the window where sunlight was spilling across Lake Michigan. "If they believe you're a threat, they'll come back, sooner or later." Rachel's palms went cold. "Then how long before we can leave?" Dominic turned back to her, his expression hard to read. "When I'm certain leaving won't mean you and your daughter end up dead within a week." It wasn't a threat, but there was no space for negotiation in his tone. He rose, cleared the plates, turned on the tap, and washed the dishes himself, each motion slow, methodical. Rachel had never met anyone like him, a man who could command a city and still wash his own dishes. Without looking at her, Dominic said, "This place is secure for the next few days. After that, I'll move you to another safe house." For now, let Lily rest. Let her play. Study whatever she needs. I have people who can help. Rachel stood, glancing around the quiet space suspended high above the city. She still wasn't used to being cared for, even temporarily. Yet deep inside, the distrust never slept. Do you always control everything like this? Dominic paused, turned to her. No, I lost everything once because I didn't. I don't let that happen again. Rachel didn't press further. She understood now that this man, whether standing in a kitchen or ruling from power, was someone who had lost too much to trust easily, and in a twist of fate she could never have imagined. It was her daughter who had become the only person he was forced to trust. At 3 a.m, the phone beside Dominic's bed began to ring sharp, insistent, slicing through the suffocating quiet of the penthouse. He woke instantly, not with the groggy confusion of a man roused from sleep, but with the alert precision of someone who had trained himself never to sleep too deeply. His hand reached for the phone lying beside his pistol and his watch, the faint glow from the screen casting flickering light across a face already fully awake. The voice on the other end was brief and urgent, just enough to make Dominic rise, pull on his jacket, and leave the room in less than 10 seconds. Rachel's eyes opened just as the door to the living room swung wide. She heard the quick, deliberate footsteps across the hardwood floor, then saw Dominic stride to the window, the pale light from his phone illuminating his expression dark, tense, focused. "What happened?" she asked, still half tangled in the blanket, her voice tight with dread. Dominic didn't look at her. He was already speaking into his phone, his tone low and controlled, each word dropping heavy into the silence. "Your apartment, in West Side, it's on fire." The words struck her like a blow to the chest. Rachel sprang from the couch, barefoot, rushing toward him. What do you mean?" "On fire," Dominic nodded once, finally meeting her eyes. "The building where you lived was set ablaze at 3:12 a.m. My people are on site. No casualties. Residents were evacuated, but your apartment. There's nothing left." Rachel went still. She couldn't speak. In her mind, she saw the cracked window frames, the old sofa she had covered with a threadbare coat, the stuffed bear Lily had held since infancy, tiny fragments of an ordinary life swallowed whole by flames. Dominic stepped closer, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "I've made sure everyone's been moved to temporary housing. I'll handle the costs. No one was hurt. But..." He paused, his voice darkening. "This wasn't an accident. They know who you are. They know what you saw. And now they're sending me a message that nothing is out of their reach." Rachel sank into the nearest chair, her head bowed. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Only a hollow weight pressed against her chest, a quiet knowing that what she had lost was not furniture or walls, but the fragile illusion of a normal life. Dominic let the silence stretch before speaking again, his tone softer. "I'll reinforce security here, but I think it's best if you and the girl move somewhere else. Somewhere off the grid. No one can know." Rachel lifted her head, her voice barely audible. "I don't have a choice." "Do I?" Dominic shook his head. "No. Rachel, not anymore." She looked toward Lily's room, where her daughter slept peacefully, unaware that her small, cluttered bedroom full of stuffed animals and crayons was now ash and smoke. Rachel drew a long breath. She had lost her home. She had lost her past. But she hadn't lost her daughter. And as long as Lily was safe, Rachel was ready to walk any road, even one paved with power, blood, and silence. A man in plain clothes entered quietly. Dominic introduced him as Salvatore, head of personal security and logistics. Then he turned back to Rachel. 10 minutes to pack. We're leaving through the basement. The car's waiting. The new apartment was set up last night. I had a feeling the restaurant wouldn't be the end of it." Rachel nodded. Her eyes were dry now, hardened. She walked to the bedroom and gently woke Lily. The girl rubbed her eyes, confused but calm. When she saw her mother's face, she didn't ask questions. She simply took her hand and held it tight. 10 minutes later, the black SUV slid into the darkness like a phantom, gliding away from the glittering towers of the Gold Coast. Inside it were two small lives with nowhere left to return, to carried toward a place that would be their only refuge. In the hands of a man Rachel could not yet decide was a savior or the keeper of their fate. But one thing she knew with absolute clarity after the fire that night. There was no turning back. The black SUV slipped through the security gate of a quiet northern suburb just before dawn. The stone-paved drive, lined with maple trees turning red, led to a two-story house of modern design, elegant but understated. Its wide windows were covered by thick drapes, the perimeter protected by discreet high-tech fencing. Nothing to suggest that this was a safe house for witnesses to a citywide assassination plot. Salvatore got out first, scanning the perimeter before opening the door for Rachel and Lily. Dominic said nothing. He gave a brief nod to the man waiting by the porch, Peter, in charge of the outer security team. Dominic entered last, his eyes sweeping the interior as if to confirm that every detail met his personal standard. Rachel stepped into the living room, feeling like an actress cast in someone else's story. Lily held her hand, eyes wide at the high ceilings, the oversized sofa, the thick carpet, and the faint trace of lavender diffused in the air. Everything was immaculate, too perfect to feel lived in. Rachel realized the house had likely been prepared long before tonight, waiting. Ready. She didn't know how Dominic could have predicted this outcome, but she began to understand that he always stayed one step ahead of everyone else. That was why he was still alive. Dominic gestured toward the stairs. 2 bedrooms upstairs. 1 for Lily. 1 for you. Kitchen stocked with food and essentials. Rest for now. I'll be back at 10. We'll discuss what comes next then. Rachel nodded, no thanks. No resistance. She was too exhausted for manners. And Dominic seemed to understand that. He looked at Lily for a long moment before leaving. The watchfulness in his gaze had shifted from assessment to protection. Rachel followed him with her eyes until the door closed, and the soft click of the electronic lock filled the silence. She sat on the sofa, Lily leaning against her shoulder. Neither spoke. The stillness stretched between them, filled with the quiet weight of everything unspoken. At last, Rachel murmured, still staring ahead. Our home burned down. You know that. Lily nodded. Calm. I heard the man say so in the car. But I'm not sad. Home isn't the walls. Rachel turned to her. Stunned. Her 8-year-old. Hair tousled. Still half asleep. Had just said something her own heart wasn't ready to accept. Rachel didn't answer. She rose and wandered through the house. The kitchen was open and spotless. The refrigerator, full milk of Lily's favorite brand. Whole grain bread. Cheese. Fresh orange juice. A small note was taped to the door in neat, rounded handwriting. If you need anything, call the number below. Rachel understood immediately this wasn't kindness. It was a system, a well-oiled machine designed so no one inside would ever lack for comfort. Except for freedom. She returned to the living room. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, a coloring book open, a crayon in her small hand. She looked as though she had lived there forever. Rachel watched her, then glanced around at the silent house. Realizing the quiet no longer felt like safety, it felt like a new form of control. Dominic hadn't imprisoned them, but he had surrounded them with comfort, logic, and the undeniable truth that every exit behind them had already been burned. Upstairs, Rachel opened the door to her room. The bed was large, the sheets crisp, white, the vanity uncluttered. The closet, neatly filled with clothes in her size. She checked the labels, ordinary brands she had once admired from behind store windows. Not luxury, but carefully chosen, familiar enough to soothe. Calculated enough to confine. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled slowly. She couldn't deny it any longer. Dominic Rinaldi was no accident in her life. He was the gravitational force pulling her and Lily into the orbit of a world that would never belong to them. Yet he was also the only thing standing between them and the faceless danger closing in from every direction. She knew she had no other choice. And sometimes, the bitterest form of acceptance is the moment you realize there is no way back. Dominic returned at exactly 10 that morning, just as he had promised. He wasn't accompanied by a convoy of guards, only a calm, middle-aged woman carrying a bag of toys and a few children's books. Rachel met them at the door, and Lily came running from the living room as soon as she heard his voice. There was no shyness in her. None of the hesitance one might expect from a child who had just lived through something terrifying. She simply looked at Dominic with curious eyes, as though she were beginning to understand that this man was not like the ones her mother had always warned her about. Dominic bent slightly, offering her a small white wooden box with a delicate clasp. "I have something for you," he said. "I'm not sure you'll like it, but your mother mentioned you love languages." Lily accepted it with both hands, opened the lid, and gasped with delight. Inside was a set of vocabulary cards in several languages, beautifully printed, illustrated, neatly arranged. Dominic said nothing more, simply stepped back and let her explore. Rachel watched, surprised by the natural ease in the way he interacted with her daughter. No forced charm, no awkwardness, no attempt to win affection. He was simply present, in the right way and at the right time. All morning, Lily sat by the window sorting through the cards, whispering words in German, Italian, and even Russian. Each time she pronounced one correctly, Dominic gave a small nod, a flicker of genuine admiration crossing his face. Rachel saw it, and she understood he didn't see her daughter's gift as a novelty. He saw it as something rare, something real. That afternoon, Dominic stayed for lunch with them for the first time. There was no wine, no expensive steak, just simple chicken soup, toasted bread, and fruit juice. Lily chatted about school, her friends, even the first words she had ever learned as a toddler. Dominic listened, truly listened, never interrupting, never glancing at his phone. Rachel kept her quiet distance, yet she couldn't deny that Lily was slowly opening up to him. After the meal, Dominic stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and leaned toward Rachel, speaking softly so Lily wouldn't hear. "Your daughter is unlike any child I've ever met. I don't know how you managed to raise her that way, given how you've lived. But I respect it." Rachel didn't know how to respond. The compliment felt different, devoid of pity or shallow praise. It carried the weight of genuine recognition. Later that afternoon, as Dominic prepared to leave for work, Lily ran to the door to see him off. She waved, calling out softly, "Bye, Uncle Dominic." He turned, the corner of his mouth lifting in a quiet, imperfect smile, but one that was real. From inside the doorway, Rachel saw the moment, and for the first time, she felt something in her world shift. Not quickly, not easily, but undeniably, and somehow, it began quietly, almost invisibly with Lily. That night, after Lily had fallen fast asleep in her new room, Rachel went downstairs to get a glass of water and found Dominic sitting alone on the back patio. He hadn't turned on the lights, only the faint glow of the distant city spilled across the glass wall, tracing the sharp line of his cheekbones and the quiet weight in his eyes. In his hand, he held a glass of amber liquor. Untouched, he heard her soft footsteps but didn't turn around. Rachel hesitated for a moment, then stepped out, leaning lightly against the railing a respectful distance away. Neither spoke at first. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint murmur of passing cars. It was Dominic who broke the silence. "My mother was the first person who taught me to cook," he said quietly. "She used to say that when your hands are busy washing vegetables and your heart is busy loving, you don't have time to do bad things." Rachel tilted her head toward him, surprised that a man like him would begin a conversation with something so gentle. Dominic continued, his voice lower, slower. "She died when I was 12. Her heart stopped right there at the table. While she was folding ravioli dough, I was the one who found her. My father wasn't home. He usually wasn't." Rachel stayed silent. She could tell these weren't words easily spoken. Dominic looked down at the glass in his hand but still didn't drink. "After the funeral, I asked my father why he didn't cry. He said tears don't change anything. Then he told me that from that day forward, I was the man of the house. And men don't cry. Men don't show weakness. Men don't forgive." Rachel drew in a slow breath, not out of surprise, but sorrow for the 12-year-old boy who had been forced to swallow such cruel rules so early. Dominic leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the night sky. I grew up in a world where feelings were burdens and memories were things to bury. But when your daughter walked into that restaurant and told me not to eat the pasta, I remembered my mother, another small woman who somehow had the kind of strength that made men listen. Rachel sat down in the chair beside him, not facing him directly, but angled slightly his way. You didn't yell at Lily, or doubt her. Most people would have thought she was imagining things. Dominic shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. I've lived long enough to know there are things you can't explain, but should still believe in. The way she looked at me, the way she spoke, it wasn't random. Rachel didn't know whether to feel comforted or uneasy that Dominic was beginning to put his faith in her daughter, but she could hear the truth in his voice. It wasn't the kind of belief born from manipulation. It was the kind that grows quietly from recognition, from shared understanding. She turned to him, looking longer this time. You're not what I expected. Dominic rotated the glass in his hand, eyes still on the sky. I'm not what I expected. Either. The words fell between them, like a fragile confession unguarded. Honest. And real enough that Rachel didn't know whether to keep her distance or move closer. In the end, she said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only way to listen to the pain that has slept too long, smoldering beneath the armor of strength. And in that brief, weightless moment, they were no longer Dominic Rinaldi and Rachel Moore. They were simply two human beings, both broken, both rebuilt, sitting side by side on a night that would never again feel ordinary. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the heavy curtains of the penthouse, Rachel woke with a strange, quiet feeling in her chest. It wasn't fear like the morning she used to wake with a start in her old apartment, and it wasn't the tense alertness that had shadowed her since being pulled into Dominic's dangerous orbit. It was something different. Stillness. A fragile kind of calm she hadn't known in years. She left her room, stepping past the living area where she had once slept on the long sofa during those first uncertain nights, and headed toward the kitchen in search of coffee. What she found stopped her cold. Dominic was already there. Gone was the tailored suit, the air of command. He was wearing an apron, standing at the stove, flipping an omelet, with the quiet concentration of someone who found solace in the ritual. Lily sat nearby on a high stool, legs swinging, hands wrapped around a mug of hot cocoa, her face glowing as if this were a holiday morning. Rachel stood for a few seconds, surprised into stillness, before asking lightly, though unable to hide her curiosity, "What's the occasion?" Dominic didn't turn around. "I thought it was time we had breakfast, like a normal family." The word family caught Rachel off guard. Her chest tightened, unsure how to respond. But Lily had no hesitation. "Mom, Uncle Dominic makes Italian omelets. They're really good," she exclaimed, grinning. Rachel smiled and stepped forward, poured herself a cup of coffee, and sat down beside her daughter. The aroma from the stove olive oil, eggs, and something faintly citrus filled the air with warmth. It wasn't luxury that comforted her, but the simple familiarity of home, something she hadn't felt in so long. She'd forgotten how much she'd missed it. Breakfast unfolded in easy rhythm. Lily chattered about a Spanish book Dominic had given her, and Rachel was quietly amazed by how much her daughter remembered every word, every accent. Dominic spoke little, but everything he said carried a calm gentleness that softened the space around them. He told stories of how his mother used to add a touch of lemon zest to her eggs for brightness, and how he always used a wooden spoon instead of metal so as not to scratch her old pan. After breakfast, Dominic surprised them both by saying he would cook dinner that night. Rachel blinked, taken aback, then nodded, partly because she was curious, partly because, if she was honest, she was looking forward to it. The rest of the day passed quietly, almost peacefully. Dominic disappeared into his work for half the afternoon, while Rachel took Lily up to the rooftop garden, where a few potted herbs and flowers thrived under the care of the gardener. By sunset, the kitchen was alive again, this time with the scent of simmering tomato sauce, basil, and garlic bread toasting in butter. Dominic worked alone, unhurried, meticulous, arranging everything with the kind of care reserved for sacred things. He set the table by the large window overlooking the city skyline, the light outside fading into gold and blue. When the three of them sat down, no one mentioned the past, or danger, or loss. There was only warm food. Lily's laughter as Dominic joked that if she learned French next, she could read his restaurant menus without translation, and a fleeting glance between Dominic and Rachel, brief but full of quiet meaning. It wasn't a family in any official sense, but for a few moments, none of them felt misplaced. Dominic poured Rachel a glass of red wine, his voice low and tentative. "I'm not sure I'm any good at this," he said, "but I'm trying." Rachel looked at him, her eyes softening in the flicker of candlelight. "I can see that," she whispered, "and so can Lily." In that moment, the distance between a powerful man and a weary mother seemed to dissolve. What remained were three people learning, awkwardly and tenderly, how to share a table, and perhaps something far rarer, a sense of belonging. It was an ordinary evening, but for them, that ordinariness was nothing short of miraculous. Night settled over the penthouse, city light spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows in long streaks across the polished wood floor. Rachel sat on the sofa with a book, Lily asleep nearby, while Dominic stood by his oak desk, eyes fixed on the glow of his laptop screen. He had just received a report from his security team, but not a single word left his lips. The air felt dense, charged with something Rachel couldn't name, a chill that crept up her spine before she even understood why. Dominic's fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, his gaze scanning a list of names, people within his own organization. Rachel approached quietly. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft but wary. He didn't answer right away. Then he turned, eyes sharp and shadowed. "Something's wrong," he said lowly. "I can feel it, a signal of betrayal." Rachel frowned, confused. Betrayal? By who? Why? Dominic turned back to the screen, typing again. "Gregory. 15 years he's been with me. But today, strange transactions. Hidden calls. And actions that don't follow orders." Rachel fell silent. She had never truly understood how fragile loyalty could be in this world, even between those who had stood side by side for decades. Dominic exhaled and looked toward the window, where the city lights shimmered over Lake Michigan. "Someone I trusted is feeding information out. No one else could have. And now they know about you and Lily, about the restaurant. If they decide to act, you'll be the first targets." Rachel felt her chest tighten, her heartbeat pulsed so violently it hurt. She had lived cautiously all her life. But this fear wasn't abstract. It was tangible, closing in on her with every breath. Dominic crossed the room to the bar and poured a glass of whiskey. "Nate," his tone turned steady. Cold. Decisive. "I need you to help me watch for anything suspicious. Every detail, no matter how small, could save your lives." Rachel nodded, her voice trembling. I'll keep my eyes open." Dominic stepped closer, touching her hand briefly. Not for comfort, but emphasis. "Your daughter, she'll be the key. Lily has a way of noticing things others don't. Pay attention to what she tells you. Everything she observes could matter." A mix of fear and resolve surged through Rachel. She understood now that protecting Lily meant more than just hiding it, meant vigilance, awareness, partnership. For the first time, their survival depended on more than Dominic's power. It depended on their ability to see through the lies. Dominic sat again, his eyes locked on the streams of data flowing across the screen. "Gregory is intelligent. He used to be my right hand. If he's turned, we have to move fast. I won't risk your safety." Rachel drew a long breath, trying to steady herself. She'd known tension in the everyday grind of waitressing, but this was a different world, where a misplaced word or an unrecognized face could mean death. Dominic looked at her again, voice low but unwavering. "I trust you. If we work together, you and your daughter will be safe. But one moment of carelessness and it's over." Something inside Rachel shifted then. The fear hardened into determination. She glanced toward Lily's sleeping figure, remembering the girl's fearless voice in the restaurant that night, and understood there was no going back. They were already too deep. Dominic rose, shut the laptop, and walked toward the balcony. The city's light washed over his face, and in that glow Rachel saw not just control and power, but exhaustion, a man still fighting to protect the only people left within his reach. There would be no returning to simplicity. No, pretending ignorance. The world they had stepped into was one where betrayal could kill, and trust had to be earned in blood and vigilance. Rachel drew in a steadying breath. She knew now she and Lily were no longer bystanders in Dominic's story. They were part of it, and their survival depended on him as much as his did on them. Night had fallen over the safe house so completely that Rachel could hear Lily's steady breathing in the next room. Dominic stood before the security console, eyes tracking every camera and every small movement in the surrounding area, while Rachel sat quietly at the table, a heavy weight pressing on her shoulders. And then Dominic turned to her, his gaze hard but resolute, and said, "You will be the most important link tonight. I need you to act as bait." His voice even and low, dropping like a reality she could not deny. Rachel went numb for a moment, swallowing the rising fear in her chest. "Bait," she repeated, needing to confirm she had heard correctly. And Dominic nodded without taking his eyes off the screen. "You must create an opportunity for Gregory and the others to reveal themselves. The child will be safe, I guarantee it. But you will be their focus. If you fail, everything could collapse." Rachel drew a long breath and forced herself steady. This was not fiction. The intelligence from Dominic's security team showed every movement in the city could turn lethal, and she now had no choice but to cooperate. He handed her a secure phone with a list of contacts and a set of concise instructions, emphasizing that she must remain calm and follow orders to the letter. The phone felt heavy in her hand, as if it bore the lives of herself and her daughter, and she understood that any hesitation could bring immediate ruin. Dominic watched her for a long beat, then softened his tone. "You will not be alone. My team and I will monitor everything, but we will not intervene directly so as not to expose the plan. You must make them show themselves. Use your instincts and observe." Rachel nodded, heart racing. Even as a fierce determination rose inside her to protect her child, she stood and went to the window, the night cloaking the neighborhood, streetlights and passing headlights blurring into smears, and she told herself that every small motion might be a signal, yet she would trust her own vigilance. Dominic guided her through the tiny stage details to attract attention. Leave the window open. Place a dark bag on the railing. Move through the house on a steady, predictable rhythm so a stranger's eye would notice and react. Rachel followed each measured action, hands shaking, but her focus absolute. And she paused to stroke the small photo of Lily on the table to remind herself why she must do this. Dominic's voice cut into the dark like an instruction carved into the air. "One careless minute, and they'll know you and the child are targets. Stay alert, and they will reveal themselves. Then we will deal with them swiftly." Rachel looked into his eyes and felt the weight of responsibility and the trust he was placing in her. For the first time in her life, she was not merely protecting her daughter, but had become an active part of a life and death plan. And she was ready to play the role of bait, despite the terror, because failure was not an option. Lily slept on, unaware that her mother stood at the threshold between life and death, and it was Rachel's calm and resolve that would buy the little girl another tomorrow. She inhaled deeply, staring into the darkness beyond the window, prepared to expose the betrayer and the lurking threats, knowing she had stepped fully into Dominic's world where life and death, trust and betrayal, are separated only by the blink of an eye. Night lay heavy and silent, the only sounds the wind whispering through the trees outside and the muted amber of streetlights bleeding through the windows. And Rachel stood motionless at the glass, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. Lily slept soundly in the next room, unaware that her mother was about to become an essential part of a plan for survival. Dominic sat in the security room, watching every camera feed and every tiny movement, his voice cool and precise as he said, "You must be in position. If they spot anything unusual, it will all fail." And Rachel nodded, fingers gripping the edge of the kitchen counter to steady herself. The first sound came at the back door, a soft noise that would have been invisible to anyone else but which Dominic and Rachel both heard like a bell. A shadow slid past. A beam from a flashlight strobing across a face. Gregory. Once a long-trusted right hand. Now leading the team of assassins who had turned on Dominic. Rachel melted into the darkness. Breathing steadily and moving in the measured pattern, Dominic had rehearsed leave the window ajar. Drop a dark bag on the railing. Walk through the house with a steady, the visible rhythm, so any prowler's eye would notice, but not be able to pinpoint her exact location. Each second stretched taut as a wire. One of Gregory's men paused, bent to look at the bag and heard the staged footsteps. Suspicion flickered in his gaze. Dominic, silent, watched every micro-reaction on the screen. Rachel felt her heart hammer so loud it echoed in her ears. Yet she kept her composure, and continued to send the signals she had been told to send. Suddenly another silhouette appeared at the front entrance. A flashlight flashed and snagged on the glass, making Rachel flinch for the briefest instant. Dominic's voice crackled in over the radio. Low and sharp. Hold your position. Do not look directly at them. Let them see you and think they are in control. Rachel swallowed, her pulse pounding like a drum. Gregory's team entered, scanning the house with weapons in hand. Yet all their attention was drawn by the staged signs Rachel created. They did not realize they were stepping into a trap meticulously prepared in advance. From the security room, Dominic manipulated the visual cues, flickering lights, decoy camera feeds convincing the intruders they held the advantage. Rachel glanced at Lily sleeping and understood that every move she made was to keep the little girl safe. Each step, each small motion was calculated. And little by little the intruders revealed themselves, who stood where, who doubted whom, who among them was the traitor. Dominic signaled, and Salvatore and Peter readied themselves from concealed positions to intervene at the right moment. Rachel felt taut as a drawn bow, but moved with practiced fluidity under Dominic's direction. At last Dominic gave the signal the enemy had fallen into place. Every whisper and gesture recorded and accounted for. And when he flooded the room with light, the whole of Gregory's team was subdued without a single gunshot heard beyond those walls. The danger was neutralized cleanly, and Rachel exhaled a long, shuddering breath as some of the weight that had been crushing her chest eased. She had survived. Her daughter remained safe. And for the first time, Rachel understood that cooperating with Dominic was not only necessary but the only way to get through a night that had no other exit. After the intruders were subdued, Dominic gathered Salvatore and Peter into a private room, the soft ceiling light spilling across the polished wood of the table. Rachel stood outside, listening to the measured, heavy rhythm of Dominic's footsteps on the floor, steady, deliberate, yet charged with tension. He took his seat, resting both hands on the table. His gaze deep and cold as he studied the folder Salvatore handed him. "Vincent," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "He wasn't just a longtime associate. He's been feeding information to Sulov details about your location, the child, and the weak points in our security grid. Had we not discovered it in time, things would have ended very differently." Rachel felt her throat tighten, her pulse quickening at the sound of that name. Vincent. She remembered it from the times Dominic spoke about his trusted men, people who had stood beside him for years. Yet now the truth hung in the air like a dark curtain drawn over what little normalcy remained of their lives. Dominic's words came one by one, heavy and sharp. He knew we were tracking every movement, and he still chose to work with the enemy. That's why forgiveness isn't an option. Rachel stayed silent, frozen where she stood, fear and tension spreading through every inch of her body. Dominic's voice deepened, steel beneath the calm. "I take no pleasure in punishing those I've trusted, but when the lives of you and the child are at stake, there's no choice. Vincent will answer for what he's done, and I'll make sure anyone who threatens you both never gets another chance." A chill ran through Rachel's spine, mingled with an unexpected sense of safety. Dominic had everything under control, and now, more than ever, he seemed determined to protect them. She realized that this resolve wasn't born of ego or vengeance. It came from a sense of duty, and from the debt of life Lily had unknowingly placed upon him. Dominic rose, pacing the room slowly, his eyes never leaving Rachel. You and Lily are the reason I'm not letting this go. I could act as I used to, ignore the warning signs. Trust the wrong men, but not now. Every decision from here on centers on you. Rachel met his gaze, sensing the burden he carried, the danger that still hung over them. The storm not yet passed. Dominic's voice dropped. Steady but clear. We'll keep tracking Vincent. Sulov. Anyone tied to this? You must be ready. But trust that I know what needs to be done to keep you safe. I don't intend to regret a single decision. Rachel drew in a slow breath, absorbing the weight and calm certainty in his tone. For the first time, she understood that survival in this world required more than luck. It required someone strong enough, rational enough, to make choices no one else dared to make. And Dominic, for all his ruthlessness and cold precision, was that person, the one willing to protect them at any cost? Even if it meant facing the betrayal of someone he once called brother. She knew now there was no turning back. Yet within that realization flickered a fragile thread of hope that somehow, through Dominic's resolve and control, she and her daughter might live to see the light beyond this dark night. That night, the safe house lay cloaked in darkness. Only the faint flicker of surveillance monitors and the blinking green LEDs of the security system marked that it was still awake. Dominic stood before the electronic map, tracing his finger across the glowing grid where red dots pulsed steadily. Rachel and Lily sat quietly on the sofa nearby, eyes fixed on the large central screen, hearts pounding in sync with every movement of Sulov's men now appearing on the radar. Dominic moved deftly among the controls, his voice calm, but cutting as he directed Salvatore and Peter from their hidden posts. Hold your positions. Wait until they step into the trap. No one acts until I give the order. Rachel's body felt wound tight as wire. Her hands gripped the edge of the couch while Lily leaned against her shoulder. Eyes wide, yet unafraid. Dominic verified the last sensors, then said quietly, all targets are in position. Execute. At once the house filled with a strobe of lights and decoy noises, footsteps, doors creaking, whispers that threw Sulov's team into confusion, driving them deeper into the corridor where Dominic's men lay waiting. Rachel held her breath as each frame on the screen shifted. Every second seemed to balance life and death on a blade's edge. Dominic's hand cut through the air, his final signal, and in perfect unison, Salvatore and Peter emerged from the shadows, surrounding the intruders. It happened so fast there was no gunfire. No scream. Only a blur of motion before the threat was over. Dominic turned from the monitors, his voice low. They're neutralized. No more immediate danger in the area. You and the girl can breathe again. Rachel inhaled deeply, the tightness in her chest loosening at last, though a thin thread of unease remained. Dominic rested a hand on the table, his expression cold but edged with reassurance. However, your life as it was cannot be recovered. I can arrange new identities, new papers, a new home far from this city. No one will ever find you again. Rachel's mind reeled. She looked at Lily sleeping soundly, small hands clutching her stuffed bear, and knew this was the only way to keep her daughter safe from whatever might still be coming. Dominic continued, his tone steady and measured. This isn't a threat. It's protection. You may leave now, or stay a short while under my supervision while we finalize the transfer and verify there are no remaining leaks. Anyone who knew your location has been dealt with. Absolute safety comes only when you accept the plan. Rachel stayed silent, her thoughts circling back through everything that had happened. The warning at the restaurant, the fire that destroyed their home, the midnight invasion. Each moment had pushed them deeper into a world she never meant to enter. And yet within that chaos, she'd discovered something undeniable. Dominic wasn't just ruthless power. He was the only person capable of keeping them alive. She looked at him, then at Lily, her voice soft but firm. We'll go. I won't risk another night like this. Dominic gave a small nod, his eyes acknowledging both her courage and her fear. I'll handle everything: passports, documents, a safe place to start over. Once you leave, there will be no danger. But understand this, Rachel, once you go, You can't come back. A long exhale slipped from her chest, carrying equal parts, relief and grief. The danger was over. But so was the life she had known. Dominic stepped closer, his gaze steady, resolute, almost stern. Get ready. We leave Chicago in a few hours. It's the only way to keep you both alive. Rachel drew Lily close, feeling her daughter's steady breath and the warmth of her small body. Whatever they were leaving behind home, safety, the woman she once was, it no longer mattered. They still had each other, and they still had a chance. The penthouse fell silent again, save for the soft rustle of Dominic closing files and the glow of the monitors fading into standby. Outside, the night that had ended Sulov's threat was giving way to the faintest light of dawn, the beginning of another life. One shaped by escape, survival, and the quiet protection of a man who now held both their fates in his hands. The next morning, Rachel and Lily woke in their new safe house on the quiet outskirts of the city, a place that looked tranquil on the surface but was guarded by a level of security Rachel had only ever seen in spy movies. The two-story home was painted a pale cream, surrounded by a small garden dappled with trees, and a closed garage that allowed them to come and go unseen. Rachel opened a window and drew a long breath, trying to feel the rhythm of an ordinary life, though a trace of the unease from their last night in Chicago still lingered inside her. Lily came skipping down the stairs, eyes bright, wearing the new clothes Dominic had laid out for her before they left the penthouse. Her small hands clutched the worn teddy bear she'd carried from their old apartment. She giggled, untouched by the tension around them. And Rachel smiled, relieved for the first time in weeks. Dominic wasn't there that morning. He had returned to Chicago to close the final threads of unfinished business. Yet he had left behind a notebook filled with precise instructions and emergency contacts. Rachel opened it, reading line by line, feeling both safe and uneasy at once. Every note, every phone number was proof that Dominic had calculated their protection down to the smallest detail. In those first days, Rachel tried to build new routines for Lily language lessons. Reading, gentle games, while reminding her to stay silent about their new address and everything that had happened. Lily adapted faster than Rachel expected. She explored the house with curiosity, studied the furniture and corners, and her eyes shone when she found the little backyard garden where Rachel had scattered a few sunflower seeds and herbs. Standing by the kitchen door, Rachel watched her daughter crouch over the soil and felt a fleeting sense of peace return, fragile, but real. Days passed. Dominic sent encrypted updates about the city intel on rival movements. Faint signals from remaining threats, but also little messages for Lily language puzzles. New books. Even a small watercolor set. Rachel realized that Dominic wasn't only shielding them physically, he was protecting their spirits, giving Lily the illusion of normal childhood in a life built on vigilance. In the evenings, Rachel prepared dinner while Lily sat nearby, arranging letters into new words and sharing each discovery aloud. Rachel would gently remind her of the safety rules, how to observe without fear, how to notice without panic. At night, Dominic called through video, his voice low but warm, asking about their security points but also about Lily's studies, her drawings, her health. Rachel noticed something different in him. He no longer sounded like the cold, distant figure who ruled through fear. There was something human in his tone, steady, careful, almost tender. The quiet days passed with a rhythm that felt both familiar and foreign. Rachel did her best to make the house resemble an ordinary home breakfast with eggs and toast. Afternoons reading in the garden, lessons about English words, and the basics of nature and science. Yet beneath every normal moment ran the awareness that they were being watched, their safety engineered by precision, their freedom limited by necessity. Each time Rachel heard Lily's laughter, she reminded herself that peace was temporary, but they still had each other. And they still had the protection of a man who seemed unbreakable. A week later, Salvatore arrived with a small wooden box Dominic had sent for Lily. Inside was another set of multilingual flashcards and a few slim notebooks on translation. Lily's face lit up, her fascination renewed, and for the first time, Rachel felt that despite how their world had been torn apart, They had found something like joy, a fragile calm built inside a false reality. In those days, Rachel began to see Dominic's world differently. It wasn't only power and peril. It was also structure, resilience, and, in its own paradoxical way, life itself, a space where she and her daughter could learn, heal, and grow, even if it was under the shadow of a man who had turned danger into their only form of safety. On a quiet weekend afternoon, sunlight slanted through the living room window as Rachel sat beside Lily at the study table, helping her review the new Italian words they'd been practicing. The front door opened softly, and Dominic stepped in, not with his usual stern composure, but slower, gentler, holding a small, neatly wrapped box in his hand. Lily looked up, eyes wide, then jumped off her chair and ran toward him. Dominic knelt down, his deep voice unexpectedly warm. "I brought you something," he said. "I'm not sure you'll like it, but I wanted you to smile." Lily opened the box. Inside was a watercolor set and a few coloring books filled with bright illustrations of gardens and birds. Her face lit up instantly. She squealed with delight, wrapping her little arms around Dominic and thanking him again and again. Rachel stood watching from across the room, surprised, moved, and oddly relieved. For the first time in weeks, she saw Lily laugh freely, without tension or fear shadowing her joy. Dominic took a seat beside them, showing Lily how to mix the paints and draw petals, trees, and tiny birds. His hands were steady, his strokes patient, and every so often, his eyes flicked toward Rachel, as if to make sure she noticed that this, too, was something he could give. Rachel felt something shift quietly inside her. Dominic, the man who had once terrified her with his power and precision, now sat at her table, gentle, deliberate, teaching her daughter how to paint a bluebird. "Mom, look," Lily cried. "Mr. Dominic draws so well," Rachel smiled, crossing the room to wrap her arms around her daughter. Her heartbeat slowed. The tension she'd carried for so long began to dissolve. Dominic leaned back slightly, his voice soft but firm. "You did well, little one. I'm proud of you." Rachel looked at him, realizing that even in a world built on danger and control, warmth could still exist, and somehow, Dominic had become the unlikely source of it. As Lily painted, Dominic guided her hand, occasionally laughing low. Quiet, but real. Rachel stood nearby, silent yet aware of the connection forming between them, a fragile thread of trust in the middle of chaos. For that moment, Dominic wasn't a crime boss or a strategist. He was simply a man who cared, who wanted to give a child the comfort he himself had long forgotten. The afternoon stretched on, filled with Lily's laughter and the soft rustle of paper. The safe house, once defined by silence and fear, now echoed with color and light. Rachel watched from the doorway, understanding something she hadn't before. Her sense of safety around Dominic no longer came from obligation or fear. It came from gratitude, from witnessing the way he gave Lily something no security system ever could: joy, attention, and affection. Outside, the light faded into amber. Inside, Lily continued to paint, her laughter rising again as Dominic showed her how to draw a sky. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the warmth of it all. For the first time in months, she felt that maybe, just maybe, they had found a kind of home, not because the world was safe, but because, within its danger, one man had chosen to protect and love them both. Not out of duty, but from something far more human. The morning was quiet. Sunlight streamed softly through the curtains, brushing across Lily's face as she stirred awake. Rachel stood by the bed, watching her daughter pull the blanket up to her shoulders, her small body still drowsy and warm. Her own heartbeat hadn't yet returned to normal after the endless days of tension. Dominic was by the window, his tall frame outlined by the gentle light spilling in. His expression was serious, contemplative, yet there was something softer about him that morning, something that made Rachel feel a fragile sense of safety. as though the chaos of their past nights had momentarily lifted. Lily blinked, then looked from her mother to Dominic, her voice quiet, but sincere. "Mom, can we stay here?" The question caught Rachel off guard. It wasn't just the innocent request of a child, it was a plea for peace, for belonging, for a life that didn't feel like running anymore. Rachel hesitated, torn between fear and the fragile calm she'd started to build. She crouched beside Lily, brushing a hand gently over her shoulder. "We have to think carefully. Sweetheart, not every place stays safe forever. But I understand what you feel." Dominic turned toward them, his gaze, steady and composed, softened in a way that startled her. "If you choose to stay," he said evenly, "I'll make sure you're safe. I've reinforced every system, checked every route in and out. You'll have peace here at least long enough to rebuild." Rachel drew in a slow breath, her mind caught between the weight of uncertainty and the flicker of hope. Lily looked up at her again, eyes shimmering with trust. "Mom, do you want to go somewhere else?" Rachel shook her head gently, her lips curving into a faint, wistful smile. "No, honey, I think staying here, for now, might be best. We can learn, rest, and just live for a while." Dominic stepped closer, his voice lowered, calm and certain. "Whatever you decide, it's your choice. I won't push. I'll only make sure you have what you need: security, food, lessons, peace. I've even prepared books and study materials for Lily, and things to keep her mind curious." Rachel listened, a strange mix of comfort and tension knotting in her chest. Then she bent down, wrapped her arms around her daughter, and whispered, steady but tender, "If I say we'll stay, then trust me. Okay, I'll protect you. We'll make this place ours. Together." Lily hugged her back tightly, her small hands gripping her mother's shirt, eyes bright with joy. Dominic watched them in silence, giving a slight nod as if acknowledging a decision that carried more weight than either of them realized. For the first time in what felt like forever, Rachel felt her breath ease. The world outside was still uncertain. Danger still lurked in the unseen corners. But here, within these walls, something had shifted. This place, this quiet house with its sunlit garden, wasn't just a hideout anymore. It was the beginning of something new. When Rachel looked out the window and saw sunlight spill over the little patch of earth where Lily would soon play, she understood the quiet truth in her daughter's question. Staying wasn't just a choice, it was the first step toward hope. For now, this was home, fragile, borrowed, but real enough to let them breathe. And for the first time in many long, dark days, Rachel believed that peace, no matter how temporary, was something they truly deserved. Morning light poured through the windows of the safe house, flooding the room with a gentle, golden warmth. Rachel stood beside Lily, watching her daughter play with her new toys, laughter bubbling softly in the quiet air. For the first time in what felt like forever, peace began to seep into her chest, quiet, steady, and real. They had found a place to call home, not the cramped apartment on the west side filled with broken memories, but a house that felt safe, watched over, and alive. A place where they could start again. Dominic had given them that a fragile kind of peace wrapped in steel and care. Here, Lily could learn, play, and feel loved, and Rachel could finally breathe without counting every heartbeat, without waiting for danger to knock. Their story is a quiet reminder that in life, no matter how deep the chaos or how close the danger, love, trust, and the fierce instinct to protect those we hold dear remain the greatest sources of strength. Sometimes, the people who walk into our lives unexpectedly are the very ones who change our direction forever. Every trial leaves behind a lesson in courage, resilience, and inner strength, qualities we often don't realize we possess until life demands them. It's also a reminder that no matter where we go, and family and compassion remain the most human truths we can hold on to. If this story touched you, and you'd like to hear more heartfelt tales each day, don't forget to subscribe to Underworld Love Stories. Hit like, and share it so your friends can enjoy it too. We would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell us how this story speaks to your own life, your experiences, and what it stirred in your heart. Thank you for watching. We wish you and your loved ones good health, joy, and peace each day. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next video, where more stories of emotion, hope, and meaning await.